Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pathways with your host, me, Todd Allen Baker. Welcome back. We're back in the studio. I got rid of the Christmas COVID, so we are back in the studio. And I have a special guest today, longtime friend since, wow, 1990,
1994.
1994. Yeah. He's a great performer and a great vocalist. And what I would say one of his specialties is, and he is probably the best vocal teacher I've ever had. And he's a great vocalist and a great vocal teacher. I've had other friends that will swear by him till this day that he is the best vocal teacher. A dear, dear friend. We haven't spoken in a long time. We text every now and then via Facebook, but it's a joy and a pleasure to see him. And this is my guest. We worked together on opposite ends, and we were good friends when I worked back in Opryland in 1994. So this is Kyle Gonyea. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ah, it's nice to see you. How's the
You
weather up
too.
there in Connecticut?
It's very cold.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's about 41 but it feels like maybe 37.
Yeah, that's how it is here. It's
Yeah.
just nothing particular.
Okay. Yeah. No,
And
no snow though, thank
no
God.
snow. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Oh, it's so good to see your face after, I don't know, since 20, 30 years. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah, just about.
You look the same.
No, no, no. Thank you though, but no.
You do. Your skincare regimen is amazing.
Well,
Mm,
moisturize, moisturize, moisturize. That's
yeah,
all I can tell you.
that's all you can do. All right. So I'll just start and ask you, how did you get started in this business and performing? And what was your first memories of this passion that you wanted to do this?
Oh, wow. Well, I can remember singing since I was the age of 4 or 5 and loving to sing even at that age. And I also had a love for just music in general. Um, but in terms of theater, I mean, I was a theater kid in high school, and things like that. So I had the bug early on in that respect.
I
But
love
then I
when
went,
people call it the bug. You're not the first person. I won't even say it, and people just bring it out, and they're like, "It's
yeah,
the bug."
it's the bug. It bites you, and it bites you hard sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and well, as a dancer, you had the bug as a dancer.
Yeah,
I have no doubt, right?
right.
Um, so, um, so let me. I'm thinking back now, many years. So I went to college at the Hart School of Music for vocal performance music education. And on the side, I didn't necessarily, it wasn't part of my degree or anything, but on the side, I did a lot of musical theater while I was in college too. And this was, in the early nine, I graduated in the early 90s and had every intention of going right into education. Um, and, or, well, let me rephrase that. I didn't necessarily want to go into education, but I was being pushed in that direction. I really did want to go into theater. However, I was applying for jobs in music education. And in the early 90s, some people may remember that the funding for music programs in a lot of public high schools was defunct.
Yeah,
They just
there was
weren't there.
nothing. It went to athletics back then.
Exactly. So um, the jobs were very far and few between, and I didn't really find anything. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I went to a theater conference in Boston at the time called NETCs. It still might be around, the New
Mhm.
England Theater Conference, where you would go and audition for a number of theaters
I
all in one
forgot
room.
about that. I did that
Yeah,
too, like for summer stocks, and it was just
exactly.
one big collaborative of. So for our audience that doesn't know, back in the day, go ahead and describe it, Kyle, like what we did, because I totally forgot that I did those. I can't even remember what every conference, every region had
Yeah,
their own.
there was a Southeastern, there was SETCs,
Hmm.
NETCs. I think there might have been one in the Midwest as well.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, so yeah, the process simply was mostly summer stocks,
Hmm.
but some regional theaters, but mostly summer
Right.
stocks would come and hold this big audition for one day or two, and it could be as many as 15 to 20 theaters sitting in the auditorium watching people audition.
Hmm.
You had 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So you would go out and you could do anything that you wanted to in those 2 minutes. You could do a monologue and a song, or just a monologue. You could do a song and a quick dance routine. You could do anything you wanted in those 2 minutes, but that's all you had.
I totally forgot about that.
Um, so I went out, did my audition, and I got called back, I think, for 10 theaters that day, because they call you back in that day.
Yeah.
Um, and to make a very long story short, I was offered a job at the Macadam Theater in Chatham, New York, which still exists. In fact, side story, I was just there 2 summers ago watching one of my students perform at that theater. Um, so they're still there. They've been around, oh God, it must be 60 or 70 years at this point. So I did a whole summer there in 1992, I believe it was. Um, yeah, so it's 92. And then that was the summer of 92. Yeah. And then, and of course, in summer stock, for those who don't know, you do at least 8 shows in about 3 months.
Yeah, we talked about
Yeah.
that the other day with someone that I did summer stock with, how like now it's like pretty much you do two or maybe three, but back in the day I did like four in
Yeah.
like 3.5 months, 3 months. Like that's crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And on top of that, you would do children's theater in between.
Oh, that's even crazier.
It's even crazier. But those were the jobs that you just cut your teeth on.
Hmm.
Obviously, most of the cast were in their early 20s to mid 20s. There were obviously older actors that would come in and do the older roles, but it was a great training ground for what was to come.
Well, I think that that was a different stock and breed of what people have now. I mean, there's high school summer stocks, but the thing is now they usually do three shows, but the kids might only do one show. So it's
Yeah,
not like they're pounding out like, three or four shows. A lot of summer stocks now will have four shows, but they bring in different casts for each show. So it's not
that's true.
it's not the same as it used to be.
Unless you're in the ensemble for the season,
Right.
which happened to me in 2004, um, when I worked at the Music Circus in Sacramento. Um, so I went in 2003. Um, you're right. I was hired for one show. I
Yeah.
played Reuben and Joseph. Um, but there was a core group of people that would be in the ensembles, and then the next year they hired me for that core, and then I played roles, small roles in every show.
Right.
So, but yeah, that definitely does happen.
And so from there, where was your kind of pathway that kind of got you to more things to do?
Okay, so from there, um, my first stock job, I came home because I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts
Hmm.
originally, and so this summer stock in Chatham was only about maybe an hour and a half from my hometown.
Oh yeah, not far.
So anyway, so I went home and I said, okay, now what? And it still exists today. There's a publication called Backstage.
Yep, we were talking
Um,
about that too. Yep. And now it's
uh,
online. It's
it's
not
all
all.
digital mostly. Yep.
Yeah, we don't have to get our fingers all inky anymore.
That's right. And I saw an audition for an operetta called The Student Prince in uh, Wisconsin, okay, at the Fireside Theater in Wisconsin.
Well, that still exists. Yeah.
That is still going as well. Um, and I took the train into the city, sang for the director, and called me back, sang for him again. Next thing I know, I'm off to Wisconsin to play the role of Lucas um, in The Student Prince, and that was a long gig. Those were long gigs at the time because they were that was more regional dinner theater.
Hmm.
So that lasted a couple months, and then from there, I had another season at the McCaden, because that was being done in the spring, and I just got a phone call while I was doing that show to come back to the Mac, and I was like, oh boy, this is easy.
And that goes back to what we've repeated several times, that reputation matters. And sometimes you don't have to re audition. If you did a good job, they just call you back.
That's right. That's exactly right. Being professional and doing your job, and um, it goes a long way, in um, repeating
Mm-hmm.
your work at, at,
Right.
at, at certain theaters. Um, so I did another season, and while I was doing that, I get a phone call from um, the theater in Wisconsin again, saying we're doing the student prints at our sister theater in Ohio called La Comedia, which is still there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in Springboro, Ohio. So I'm like, okay, this is easy. So I finished the summer. I got in my car. I drove to Ohio. That one was in the fall. Um, and while I was there, this is in 1993, fall of 93.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there, a friend of mine who lives in Kentucky said, hey, Opryland USA is having auditions in Louisville. I said, they are, really? I was like, why don't you come down and audition? I'm like, hmm, okay. Not sure I want to do theme park, but let's why not?
But you had a
You know?
good show.
Well, I
You
didn't
had
know
the,
real I didn't know anything about it really.
but you
You
had the
know,
gig. You had the General Jackson.
I got lucky for sure in that
You
respect.
did.
Although the park shows were fabulous.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
I mean, my show is still way out west. Is still
yeah,
probably one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life.
yeah, and of course we don't have to talk about the sadness of the fact that that's all gone.
Right.
But at any rate, so I went down to Louisville. They put me through my paces, and the next thing I know, I'm finishing up Ohio. I went home for a hot second for Christmas and New Year's, and then I drove to Nashville, got an apartment, and stayed there for the whole year because about what maybe three-quarters of the way they start auditioning for the Christmas shows.
Yep.
So ended up with the Christmas show on the GJAC as well, and that took me to December of '94. While that was going on, Peter Greater-Hune, God rest his soul,
Mm-hmm.
um, cruise ship director, was auditioning in Nashville. I think it was out near the hotel somewhere, if
Yeah.
I recall
Mm-hmm.
correctly. And I auditioned for them. And before the Christmas show ended, I got a phone call to go to Florida to start rehearsing for an inaugural ship on the Silver Sea line. Um, and again, no idea I was like, cruise ships? What's that? No clue.
I remember because you left. Did you leave a little bit early?
Nope.
Oh,
I
because
stayed
I
to the
remember
end.
saying goodbye to you. I can't remember
I had to leave right away, was the thing.
because I think
Um,
my show ran longer than your G Jack show. And then I think
I
yeah, I
thought
just remember
you didn't go to
saying,
Colorado?
no, I stayed
Oh,
around.
okay.
I did Gift for Santa because I stayed around that whole year. I stayed
Okay.
spring, summer, fall, and Christmas that year.
Okay.
And yeah, Peter Greater-Hune, yeah, they were at Nashville. That's the one that I've talked about on this podcast. They kicked me
mhm.
out of the room because I thought I was called back and I wasn't called back. And I got to the front of center ready to be called back. And they scanned the room and they're like, one of you's not supposed to be here. They're like, number 23. And I was like, that's me.
Oh,
And I was
oops.
like, sorry, see you later. I'll just wait for you out in the hallway. Yep. Peter Gray. Yep. They
Uh,
totally kicked me out.
I'm sorry to hear that because it
That's
would have been
amazing,
great.
though. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, I got kicked
No.
out. I thought I was like, yeah, they called me back. Nope. Heard
uh,
wrong.
so, if anyone, for those who are listening, be sure that you hear people correctly.
Oh, yeah, mhm, totally
um,
misunderstood.
yeah, no, so because we finished the show, the Christmas show. I'm trying to remember if it was just before Christmas or just after, and then I went home for New Year's Eve. I had to be in Florida rehearsing on the 2nd of January.
Yeah, we ran all the
Yeah.
way till like New Year's Eve.
Yeah. No, the GJAC didn't.
Yeah, I think you got
from
done
what I
early.
remember.
Yeah.
So anyway, it worked out very well in terms of timing because I just went one job to the next. Um, so I stayed on Silver Sea over the course of 2 years. I stayed on Silver Sea for about 16 months.
Hmm.
And you know, it's great money, helps paid off the student loans.
Same,
But
same.
I saw the world for nothing. Well,
Yeah.
I saw the world and got paid for it,
Yeah.
you
That's what I
know.
always
Uh,
say. Cruise ships are the bot, and now they're even better.
Now they're even better. They're even better. It is a real legitimate way of working in the performing arts.
I say that all the
Yeah.
time, and I tell my dancers and my performers that you know, don't pigeonhole yourself that you want to be this ballet dance. Go for your dreams, go for your dreams. But cruise ships now, they were back then, but even now they're more legit with the aqua shows and the
Oh,
parades and the
absolute.
aerial acts and the book shows and the review shows. I mean, sometimes they're even better than a Broadway theater. The mechanics and the technical end that you get
Without a
is
doubt.
ridiculous now. And
Absolutely.
it's money in the bank. And I tell my kids, don't ever count out a cruise ship. You're a
Mm-mm.
dancer. Don't label yourself, I just want to be a ballet dancer. Because, at some point you're going to have to eat, and you don't want to, if you don't want to teach at 20 dance studios, if you want to work, there are plenty of ship jobs out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have actually a story related to that, but let me get to the next part of the journey here. So again, 16 months over the course of 2 years, I stayed on ships, and then I decided to move back to New York. So I moved back to New York um, with some great bank in my pocket, so I didn't have
Hmm.
to struggle. It was awesome. But I got a temp job immediately, et cetera, and I just started auditioning again for regional theaters, summer stocks, et cetera. And I was cast for summer season at Bucks County Playhouse, which is the oldest summer stock theater in the country to this
Hmm.
date. And it has recently, back then it was, when I was doing it, was a non-equity. Um, and, but some very wealthy investors and producers bought it a few years ago, sunk a ton of money into it, and it is back to its old glory, which I'm really happy to hear about. So did a whole season there, and then came back to New York. I auditioned for a theater called Rockwell Productions, which later became the Media Theater in Pennsylvania. This was in Media, Pennsylvania. Um, and I auditioned for, it was Men of La Mancha, actually.
Hmm.
And I got into the ensemble. I played Anselmo, but I covered the Padre. Um, and that was fun because the guy playing the Padre, just before we opened, got sick. So I did all the dress rehearsals. And what was funny about that is they were taking pictures for publicity, and it's my picture for the publicity for the show, but it was his name under my picture. I was like, wait a minute, that's not fair.
It's kind of like singing in the rain. You're a little bit of Lena Lamott for a while.
Exactly, it's exactly right. Um, but come to find out, the director and producer and artistic director of the theater had other plans for me. He had asked me during Men of La Mancha to audition for yet another operetta called The New Moon. And I said, "Oh, I had no intention of doing so." He was like, "I'd like you to audition." So okay, so I auditioned, and um, he had me sing with a couple of leading ladies and whatnot. And this woman who got that role today is to this day is my dearest friend and my matron of honor at my wedding. So you really create these long lasting bonds
Hmm.
of friendship in this business, right? Um, and so I got the lead in that show, and this was really my first lead
Hmm.
that I've got, and I was I think I was what, 28, I think, at the time. maybe 29. I don't remember now. Um, and that then, the next show was Showboat, which he hired me as Ravenel. And then the next show after that was Rosemary, and he hired me for the lead of that. So I stayed there pretty much for an entire year in one theater, um, doing these leading roles. In the in between, but how I mean, there were some breaks in
Hmm.
between the shows though. So in those breaks, I'd come back to New York and work, cater, whatever I had to do to make money. Um, and there was a production company from Germany called Stella Productions
Yep.
that had
Audition
an
for them.
office in New York City, um, and they Germany was trying to break into the world of producing musical theater,
Yeah.
because they were not very good at it. Because I mean, they're great at the opera, but they really didn't understand the medium,
Yeah.
especially the performers over there. So this
And we've
production
had some
company.
German people on that have done Grease and Cats, and I was supposed to do Cats over there, but I had to turn it down. So
Mhm.
we've had them, and you are exactly right. The way she described their work ethic over the American work ethic and the visas, like, and their time off that they receive and everything else is totally different than what we do it over here.
Completely. But also their understanding of how to do the medium on stage,
Hmm.
because opera is come on stage, park, bark,
Park and bark. Yeah.
leave stage, So, I mean, we had plenty of Germans in the cast, but most of the cast, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So long story short, while I was doing Rosemary, I got a phone call from that production company to go over and do Phantom of the Opera, to play Raoul in Phantom of the Opera, or to cover Raoul actually in the
Hmm.
first year. Um, and that show, I actually ended up leaving 2 weeks early, um, to the chagrin of my co-star, but I won't get into that. So yeah, so the point of all of that is that there were so many Brits and Americans being hired to go over to Germany to um, get musical theater off the ground, if you
Hmm.
will. Yeah. Now, unless you're an expat, what happened was that all these schools, stage schools, started to pop up in
Hmm.
Germany to teach the medium, and they were being taught by the Americans and the Brits, et cetera. And so now these casts are 90% German and 10% expats.
Hmm.
So, but that was
So
that was that was the crowning jewel, um, because the second year I was there, they asked me to cover Phantom and play Raoul for that. Raoul was my primary role, and then they asked me to cover the Phantom, and I was able to go on in that year. I went on about 54 times. To your point, Todd, because of all the different ways they do things in terms of vacations and and how etc. It's like the understudies went on all the time.
that's what my friend who is dance captain and other people said. You just go on.
Yeah, all the time.
You could say, I have a
Um,
cough, and then like, oh, okay, take some time off.
and some people would I have a cough, and they had the cough for 6 weeks.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly what
because
she said.
because
That's just
because you could take off for 6 weeks and get paid,
and get
and
paid.
then come back for like 1 or 2 days, and then get sick again.
Hmm.
But um,
How do you get that job? I would love that job
yeah,
right now.
right. um,
Well, that's
and
amazing that you,
yeah,
what an iconic show to do.
I'm so blessed and proud of being in that show. Um, granted, it's been around a long time, but to be part of the Phantom family,
Hmm.
uh,
And wear the mask. I
is
mean,
and wear the mask. I can show you mine. I have it here. Hold on.
oh, oh, it's our preset and ready. Look at this. Look at this. Oh,
And
preset.
it's under glass.
Fantastic. That is amazing. I
Yeah,
love that. That's awesome. That's a
that
good.
was that was a thrill. I
Mhm.
have to say. So, and then from there, guess what? I got a phone. So the show closed in
Hmm.
Hamburg after 11 years. And I'm like, okay, now what? Do I stay in Germany? Do I go back to New York? I said, I think I'll go back home. 2 weeks before I left, I get a phone call from Peter Greater. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I just finished a show. He's like, you want a working vacation for the next few months on the Crown Princess? And I was like, sure.
My God, Kyle, did
Yeah,
you ever audition again?
I'm getting to that. So I said, sure. So I flew home. And 2 weeks later, this was in, well, actually, a couple months later, um, I went down to Florida again, started rehearsing, and 9/11 happened while we were rehearsing.
Hmm.
So that was obviously uh, a very nerve-wracking time. Luckily, my cast and my ship, um, the ship was in Boston
Hmm.
doing the Canadian route. And so we were able to keep our jobs. All of my friends who had gigs over in Europe lost their jobs that day.
Yeah, and I was in Australia at that point in time, and we had all signed up, a bunch of us had signed up to come back. We were all friends, and we were coming back to do a European cruise
Hmm.
after that. Um, we all got back on the ship, but our route was totally rerouted
Right.
to all like the Caribbean. So we all were excited because we're like, we're going to Europe again together. And we're like,
Yeah.
no,
No.
we're going to Cozumel, Mexico again.
Well, I mean, luckily you were able to keep your
Yeah,
gig though,
yeah,
you know?
we kept our gig.
And because I thought, oh God, what's going to happen? So we got very lucky. And so, but there were no flights, obviously, anywhere,
Mm-mm.
going anywhere in the country. So we packed up all of our costumes, all of our props and whatnot into a big old van, rented, I think it must have been about 3 or 4 sedans. We all piled in and we caravanned all the way to Boston. So, yeah, we drove all the way up to Boston to meet the ship. And I was company manager. I was like, oh God. So that was a little stressful, but we did it. Um, and in the beginning, we hardly had any passengers at all.
Hmm.
But then we finally repositioned down to the Caribbean from Canada, and we started getting more and more passengers. But and that was a long contract. That was God, I think that was 8 months.
Ours got extended
Yeah,
over and over
yeah.
because of staffing. And yeah, we had to, it was from, we went from a 6 month to a 9.5 month um, because of space and staffing and so many ships being rerouted over to the Caribbean and the stuff going around. They couldn't do our 6 month rotation like we used
Mhm.
to.
Right, exactly. So, and of course, through all of this time, because this is what's going to dovetail into the next part of my life,
Hmm.
all of this time I was teaching voice. I taught voice in Germany. I taught voice in New York. Okay, um, because people would like, "Do you teach?" I'm like, "I do." So, and started slowly building, a studio over the years. Even though I was going off and doing shows and whatnot, which is actually beneficial to your students if you're out there working in the industry. Um, but I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm getting really and willfully entrenched into this whole academic side of things.
Hmm.
Um, and I was really starting to like it. Um, and I'm walking up the street at one point, and I ran into a director who directed me in Camelot at the Bucks County Playhouse. I thought, hey, how you doing? He's like, oh, I'm teaching at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, otherwise known as AMDA.
Hmm.
And I said, oh, I just put in a resume to teach there. He was like, give me your resume because they'll never see it. Give me your resume. I'll hand it to the person who does the hiring for the voice department. And I said, oh, okay. So I got it to him. And the next thing I know, I have an interview um, to teach at the academy. and this year will mark my 21st year teaching there.
So do you still go in the city to teach every day?
So yeah, well, I lived in the city until 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So obviously I was, there already, but when, the pandemic happened and whatnot, we decided to, get out of the city and buy a house and whatnot. Um, so during the pandemic, obviously everything was online, which
Right,
I absolutely, absolutely hated.
right.
Um, Ironically though, Todd, I was actually already teaching via the internet
Mm-hmm.
before the pandemic happened, and I didn't mind it at all. But when it's forced upon you,
Mm-hmm.
it's a whole different ball game. I was so resentful. But at any rate, once we got through that, so to answer your question, yes, I go in 4 days a week.
Okay. I
Um,
wish I could have seen you when I was in the city, but we were just running around like
running,
crazy.
I'm sure, I go in 4 days a week, but 2 years ago, is it 2 years ago now? I was promoted to the associate academic department director for the individual voice department.
Amazing.
Um,
Can you tell
so,
our audience, like, we've had someone else that just was on this week that went to AMDA many
uh
years ago, but can you, kind of a two-parter here, can you explain what AMDA is in a brief term? And since I have a lot of dancers and other people and actors, and a lot of dancers that listen and dance parents,
mhm.
can you explain, as a voice teacher, and I try to preach this, and it kind of doesn't get through the message, the importance of dancers and performers taking vocal lessons.
Okay, well, you said a mouthful. So one of the big things that AMDA does, we have basically four programs in New York. We
Mm-hmm.
have the acting for film, the acting studio, which
Mm-hmm.
is also stage acting, musical theater division, and dance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we actually have a dance division and dance program there. Every single dancer in that program takes a group voice lesson in their first semester, and then they have individual voice lessons in their second, third, and fourth semester. Because it is imperative that dancers have this other skill. We totally understand that it's not how they identify in terms of their strength, most of
Mm-hmm.
them. Yeah. But what they learn in terms of fundamentals of simply how to sing a melody, maybe even in a harmony line, etc. I can tell you so many success stories of our dancers who have gotten work because they knew how to sing.
And I've said this before, if you go to a Broadway show, a tour, or something, you're going to open that program, you're going to open
Hmm.
that playbill, and you are going to see an AMDA graduate. And it doesn't matter if they're a dancer or whatever, and they're in
Right.
a musical theater and they're singing.
That's right. Um, One of my students a few years ago never sung a note in her life. Fantastic raw voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but never sung a note in her life. By the time she graduated, she had already been cast as Tiger Lily in Peter Pan, and she has been in I don't know how many callbacks for Hamilton on Broadway. Yeah, because she now has this facility to sing. So it makes all the difference in the world. And I understand it's like people have their dreams. They want to be in a company, they want to be in a ballet company, they want to be in a modern company,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But those jobs are far and few between,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That are good
And
paying jobs.
yeah, and so there's a whole world out there of opportunity to perform as a dancer, but you need to have that skill
Thank
in
you.
terms of singing.
Thank you for backing up my point. I
You're
always make
entirely
that
welcome.
point,
It's
but
true.
it just kind of doesn't hit the mark with people.
And conversely, singers need to get into movement and dance.
Correct. Correct. They do. Because
Yes.
the choreography now isn't basic and simple. We don't just let the singer all the time park and bark. Like,
Mm-mm.
they're part of the action now. And especially on ships, you have to be part of the action.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to be able to move exceedingly well. You know, I had, you know, I had a little bit of movement experience, as you know, um, but I was never a dancer, but I always went to dance class.
Hmm.
And when I was in the city, even in Germany, the Corps de Ballet in Phantom, they had their own ballet studio in the theater, and I was like, "Can I join you?" They were like, "Absolutely, come on." And sometimes I'd have a jazz class, but no matter how difficult that bar was, because I was not a dancer, I went up there and did it, and they were so encouraging, but I I think looked so much better on stage because I took those classes.
And your posture, your carriage, your demeanor on stage doesn't matter if you're parking and barking.
Absolutely.
It's gonna transcend into everything that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if any of your students are thinking about going to AMDA, we have a really robust um, um, program in terms of dance theater,
Hmm.
and that includes, and it also includes acting, musical theater class, etc. So,
And with your vocal techniques, and I
mhm.
know you still kind of teach Maggie Lynn Danello sometimes, and
Oh, not in a while, but
she's still here.
but
I still see her. She's
oh,
still in
really?
Indiana with me. Yes,
Oh, for crying
yes.
out loud! Oh, well,
I
please
know.
give her a big hug for me.
I know we used to hang out. She got back here and we taught at the same Pilates studio forever and lived next door.
Oh, for crying out loud!
I know we have followed each other around since Opryland. Opryland, then I lived with her at Busch Gardens. I lived
Uh-huh.
with her at Opryland. She was my roommate there. And then she followed me back up here. Our paths have crossed since 1994.
That's fabulous.
Isn't it? It's kind
That's
of cool.
fabulous.
I know, right?
Yeah. Oh, I miss her. I haven't
She's
talked to her in a
awesome.
long time.
Um, I'll tell her. I said I'll just make sure I'll tell her today. I'll text her after this and say that I talked to
Absolutely.
you. So your style of vocal teaching. Now, I had a lot of different vocal teachers, whether it was in college, because I always knew it was imperative, and I had songs and I sang. I wouldn't classify myself, as you said, identify myself as a singer, but throughout my career, I had solos. I got paid to sing, and when I got
Hmm.
on ships, it actually did help because every now and then they would have a dancer singer role that you just pull out a mic. It would be character, whatever. But
Hmm.
about every ship I was on, not every, about five of them, and I did 7 years. Like I would do a role. I would do Will Rogers. I would do the stepsisters. I would do something else, and it would just be a one off. But
Hmm.
they would always put me up front and center to sing, and I would be dance captain, and I would have a singing role briefly. Right? It was just because they needed it, but I always understood that importance. So I had
Yeah.
other vocal teachers throughout my life. And whatever technique you taught me is probably still the technique that I use today. Do you still use that technique or do you pull from many vocal techniques that you have?
So, first of all, I'm so glad to hear that. Secondly, the foundation of the technique is very much the same.
Hmm.
But any good teacher grows as
Yeah.
the longer they teach, right?
Hmm.
So you do start to pull from different concepts and different ideas, but you make sense of it with your root understanding and philosophy, your own root understanding and
Hmm.
philosophy of the process. So I'm still rooted very much in the Italian school of thought, peppering in a little bit of Eastern philosophy with the yoga. I don't know if you
Hmm.
remember that or not.
I do. I remember
Um,
being like in like a downward dog or an upward dog, and you'd make me sing, and the way that you'd make me move my diaphragm and pull in. Like as a dancer, it always made sense because I have different people that sing from your feet, you blow in and then you push out, and like your stomach's like a different loose and you're going in and out. But the
mhm.
way you taught me was a little bit different. And I like that because I could be pulled up and still be supported as a dancer and still sing and have the endurance. So whatever it was, that just always made more sense to me.
Well, that's good. Yeah, my concept of breathing has evolved a little bit over the course of time, where even though, you know, so I'm going to get a little bit technical. We cannot feel our diaphragm. It's not possible. We can't sense it.
Hmm. Thank
Okay.
you.
So there's really no way to sing from it.
Hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
We have like 12 more minutes. Go.
Okay. All right. So you can't sense something, you
Because
can
this you're
obviously
my
can't sing
first
from it.
vocal teacher. I've had Sean Carter, I've had singers, I've had
Oh,
Arvinder Robinson.
Sean.
Yeah, I've had Arvinder Robinson. I've had people that are singers, but you're like a vocal teacher, and I know you're like a master at it, and you work at a major academy. So that's why you're crucial.
Thank you. So, in terms of how the diaphragm works in the process, it's other muscles that are controlling the release of the breath in terms of what the diaphragm does. And those are the intercostal muscles, the transverse abdominis. Okay. Very rarely is it the rectus abdominis. However, the supportiveness that comes from the rectus abdominis is important, but it's not nearly as much as we thought it needed to be. But dancers still can engage, but it's a different kind of engagement. It's not this idea of holding breath at your waist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when dancers breathe, where do they mostly breathe, right? They
Mm-hmm.
breathe into their back,
Mm-hmm.
especially the ballet dancers, right? Am I
Right.
correct in that?
You're
Yeah.
correct. You're absolutely correct.
So, and that is where most of my work comes from in terms of teaching breath. And the dancers click into it like that. I love teaching dancers because they're so in tune with their bodies. And singing is a physical process. It's just not about how good you sound.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding how you get to and access that sound through the physical process. And dancers tap into that so easily, because they really do understand everything, that's going on physically. Then we get into the emotional side of singing. That's the music part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But in terms of technique, technique is technique. So if you understand that mind body connection, you can sing. If you can speak, you can sing.
Right.
If you can walk, you can dance, right?
That's what I always was taught.
Right?
I
So,
mean, if it's
I don't
all
know how
about
graceful you might be, but if you can walk, you can dance.
right.
But
I mean,
some people don't walk correctly,
no,
right?
correct.
Yeah. So some people don't speak correctly, and if you speak correctly, you will sing correctly.
I like that.
It's
I
the
like
same
that.
idea, same
It's
concept.
kind of like, it's, speaking, um, Music Man. What is it? When he was like, when Harold Hill goes, it's just a
That's right.
sustained,
Right.
it's just
It's
sustaining your
sustained speaking. That's all it
sustain.
is.
Yeah.
Now, changing style in terms of contemporary style and legitimate style, okay, that only happens with the understanding of how you need to change the speech
Mm-hmm.
and, what you've listened to all your life,
Right.
you know. Okay. If you never watched the ballet, how would you know what it looked like?
Right.
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 And if you went into a ballet class and it said, I've never seen a ballet or watched ballet, what would you do?
Right.
Right. So understanding the style before you get into the process of learning
Mm-hmm.
is half the battle. So I say to my singers and my dancers who sing, I said, listen to everything that you can, understand the style, hear the difference between the styles. Yeah. So you understand the difference between what it takes to do ballet and jazz, two different styles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the simplicity of that is one's turned out, one's turned in.
Right. But in dance, and I always was taught this too, and I teach it when I do Pilates and I teach it when I do dance, you're using the same muscles you use to rotate out. And it's the same with Fosse. If you go all the way into parallel, the muscles are still all connected at the hip
That's
and the
right.
rotators. So you are using the exact same muscles to turn out, to go to
Hmm.
parallel, to go to inverted. It's all the same. They just go in a different direction. So the muscle
Exactly.
tissue and the way you wrap it is no different. It's the same
That's
thing.
right. And it comes down to the memory of that muscle in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the style you are dancing and or singing. Same thing with singing. It's about muscle memory and triggering that muscle memory. Well, now, what triggers the muscle memory, in my opinion, is the truthful communication of what you're saying or the story you're telling when you're dancing. That's what triggers it,
Mm-hmm.
triggers the muscle, because you don't have time to think about what your muscles are doing. You have to tell the story. So if you're well practiced and are disciplined in whatever medium we're talking about, yeah, you will be successful. But you have to have that discipline.
So I kind of like jumped around, and I know this is like the ending thing. And you've given all a lot of words of wisdom. So I really didn't have to ask, like the standard question, did you ever feel like having to give up? Because kind of things were just kind of handed to you for a little while. Um,
It's a really good
so,
question.
and I think, a lot of people say, no, and I didn't, there's always hardships, but I feel like you were pretty constant in your work.
Yeah, I was. But there was a moment
Yeah.
where I had come back from the last cruise ship job after 9/11. I had come back, and even though I got the job at AMDA, I was still auditioning. I had six, I think it was six callbacks for both the Broadway company and the tour for Little Women, to no avail. Um, I auditioned for Beauty and the Beast, which I actually ended up getting, but I wasn't their first choice. And I'm like, what's going on?
It was
you
tight
know,
back then because
you know,
that's where all the cast got cut down because of budget.
it was more than that, Todd. It was more me questioning my talent and my ability,
Mhm. And
and
we still have those moments. I just have one of those moments being age 51, just like 10 weeks ago. I had
absolutely,
a thing of insecurity, and I've not ever had that in my life. And I had one for like 10 weeks, like anxiety panic attack about, am I good enough, or am I
yeah.
this, or what's
No,
happening?
it's
And
so
so
real.
it's still real. I never had that during my career, but in this new career, and I'm getting into choreography and stuff, I just had it. I
Yeah,
just had it at age 51.
yeah. No, I get it. So I was questioning whether I wanted to continue,
Hmm.
hardcore in performing, and I kind of my believe it or not, my last book show I ever did was Cats. I was Deuteronomy, um, back at the Media Theater.
Hmm.
And by the way, interspersed in all of this, I was also doing a lot of corporate entertainment as well.
Hmm.
So I ended up as the artistic director of a worldwide corporate entertainment company for 5 years. I think the point we're trying to make is that the pathway always changes.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can, you can have, all the dreams in your world, and you should stick to your dreams for sure, but you just never know where the road's going to take you.
Hmm.
As long as you're okay with it
Hmm.
and making those changes and taking those different paths, yeah, that's how life really works and unfolds, you
hmm.
know. And I tell my students all the time, and I can probably leave you with this: the good thing about choices is that you're never stuck because you can always make another one,
Right. And
you
that
know.
kind of leads into my hook that I wrote. Remember, pathways are like the path when the sun touches the water. You don't know where it leads or ends, but you never know until you walk that path.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And it's kind of
Um,
like exactly what you just pulled from. So it's kind of
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I haven't seen
And
you in 30 years, and we just kind of pulled that together.
well, I mean, I think performers have, so much in common in terms of that. I mean, no matter where we end up, we have that mentality.
And I'm just being raw and vulnerable. Isn't it funny that I was having a 10-week panic attack because I was like getting ready to do other things in my life? And like, here I wrote this, and this is kind of what it is. It was like I was fearful to walk another pathway because I've been so steady on what I've wanted to do for so long.
Hmm.
And I'm kind of launching off into some new fields that I'm like, I know I'm going to be okay, but
Of course.
it's not, I'm not leaning into the change like I wanted to. So I got to walk that. And it's funny how sometimes this podcast has been very cathartic for me the last.
And I applaud you. I was looking at some of the other work that you've done, and I was like, this is fantastic. This is what, I'm sure people are benefiting from this greatly. So good for
Oh,
you.
thank you. I mean, literally, like I've said, the way I came up with this, I was walking the dogs one day, and I came back to my roommate, my best friend, and I was like, I'm going to start a podcast, and I'm just going to call all my friends, and I'm going to interview them and just do a master class all the time, and then they'll introduce me, and I know a lot of people, so I'm just going to talk. And
That's awesome.
I literally, it just boom, it came out of
Yeah.
nowhere within 10 minutes. And it was
I
like,
know I had the same feeling. I was walking through Lincoln Center one day and I was like, I'm going to get my master's degree. It was just like, it was a, like a split like moment of light in front of me. I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this, and I have to do it now. So I got a master's at 40. I was 47. No, I started at 47. I got it when I was 49.
See, that's amazing.
Yeah,
All right.
so
So you're inspiring me today. So I appreciate that.
my pleasure.
Uh, well, thank you. I'm going to keep you on. I'm going to sign off with the audience here.
Okay,
And thank you guys for listening to Pathways. We'll be back again for another episode. Um, I'm filming back to back today, and I didn't bring a costume change, so I could just take off my sweatshirt. So it's kind of like I've said this a couple times, it's kind of like a talk show. I'm just filming back to back in 1 week and seeing what we're doing. So it's not that I wear the same thing all the time. So thank you again for joining us. And we'll be back next week. And thank you, Kyle. I so appreciate your time. It's so good to see your face after all this time. It's just wonderful.
you
Um,
too.
just love you to bits. It just you brought back a lot of memories for me. So of the days. So I'm gonna sign off here and you stay on and thank you, audience, and see you next week.
Okay, take care.